Excuse me, Councillor Newby. Thank you very much. Good evening, councillors, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee of Monday the 5th of September. Hope you all had a restful summer. There is no doubt that this application we are discussing will bring many emotions within to the committee, the speakers and members of the public. So before we begin, I would like to remind you that you ensure your microphones are used and turned off when not being used. Please bear with us if they're a bit temperamental and just shout really loud if you have to. Please stay focused on the matter being discussed. Only planning matters are relevant, and I will be strong on this point. This is because it can cause confusion as to what matters are relevant to the planning legislation once we reach our decision. Please avoid interrupting and speaking over each other and respect the position of the chair. Please remember this meeting will be broadcast through the YouTube channel as always. With all of this in mind, I'd like to move to the first item on the agenda. Howard, do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay, we'll wait to see if Councillor Hanford and Councillor Lights have used the bus service, because I imagine that might make them a bit late. Yes, it is. We would like to move to the minutes. I'm going to go to Councillor Moore because she would like to amend the minutes, and I'm quite happy to accept that amendment.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I'd like to make a correction to minute 24, which says this and other developments should seek higher carbon neutral standards to future-proof houses and seek to reach net zero in advance of the government's 2050 target, to the following, which is what I said. This development should seek higher carbon neutral standards to future-proof houses and seek to reach net zero in line with the Council's net zero 2030 plan, which is a material consideration.
Quite happy to accept that. I've watched back the broadcast and that is what you said, and Howard and I have discussed it and he's quite happy to accept that as well, so that will be reflected in the minutes as we go forward, and I will, assuming everyone is happy, I will sign that as an accurate representation of the meeting. Thank you very much. Same rules as always on declarations of interest. Do let us know before we go into the item. And the local government access to information 1985 exclusion of the public and press is not relevant because there are no items that are being discussed tonight. So I will move forward to the one major item on our agenda today, which is planning application number 211564, out former police station and magistrate court, Amenity Road, Exeter. Ian, are you doing this one for us?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to stand because I want to address the whole committee. If the microphone doesn't work and you can't hear me, I will sit down again. So this is the application we're here to discuss. So it's the former police station site there on Heavy Tree Road. Although this is an outline planning application, the only matter reserved is landscaping, so all the other considerations are considered here in detail. It's important to understand that. The application is to demolish all the existing buildings on the site and redevelop the site for a mixture of student and co-living accommodation. I'm sure everybody knows this site. It's literally 5 minutes up the road there on Heavy Tree. There it is in full glory. We have quite an unusual arrangement here of buildings. I won't dwell on that. I think the key point to make about this is that building, or that set of buildings, really set very well back from Heavy Tree Road. It doesn't really make any form of contribution to the street scene. In fact, that's maybe why it is so set back, and it's kind of hidden by some quite substantial trees. It's not what we would consider to be an urban form of development, and I'll come back to that when we discuss the key issues. The other thing to point out there, it is surrounded by existing residential accommodation, and there's a new build accommodation, another co-living accommodation at the back of that site, which is the former ambulance station. Of course, we've also got St Luke's College opposite, along Heavy Tree Road as well. So this is the proposal. So it's a mixture of co-living. So the co-living block is there on your left, 358 studio apartments, and then the purpose-built student accommodation, which is the majority of the site there on the right, and that is in two in the form of two sort of quadrangles, and there's a total of 677 rooms there. That's a mixture of studios and cluster flats. Okay. So in terms of the appearance along Heavy Tree, you can see that there in section. It's predominantly 6 to 8 stories, this development, although the appearance along Heavy Tree will be of 6 stories. That's because the ground floor and basement is effectively below eye level. So this will appear as a predominantly 6-story building. And of course, there are larger elements because, as we know, Heavy Tree Road is on quite a strong slope upwards. So the lower element, as I would say, is opposite High Summerlands, and then it gradually increases its presence as you go up the hill to the top end. So the most prominent aspect of this development will be on Gladstone Road, and again I'll come back to that when we talk about the issues. So your officers are recommending approval tonight, and we have to have reasons for that recommendation. This is about sustainable development. There are other factors in play, but fundamentally your officers believe this is a sustainable form of development, hence the recommendation. So what I'd like to do for you now in the next sort of 10 minutes or so is unpack that reason and that justification a little bit. We're not going to go into the full technical assessment. That is actually prepared for you in the officer's report. It's a very detailed report. I know that you've all read that report and you can see the reason justifications. So what I'd like to do for you tonight is just unpack that, as I say, and highlight some of the strategic considerations which this application raises, but also there's some key local issues, and then there are a number of other considerations. So these are the strategic considerations that this application raises tonight. In no particular order. So the first thing is the sustainable development and the application of the National Planning Policy Framework. We don't, as a city, currently have a 5-year land supply. What that means is that there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and what's called a tilted balance applies. Now, we've recently had an appeal decision that didn't go our way. An inspector found the Spruce Close application and allowed the appeal. That hasn't improved our 5-year land supply, that decision. In fact, it's made it worse because the inspector viewed the way in which we were calculating 5-year land supply in a slightly different way. So we don't have a 5-year land supply. The Spruce Close appeal demonstrates that quite clearly, and so the tilted balance does apply. Notwithstanding that, there are some other important principles that the scheme raises for your consideration this evening. As I say, in no particular order, this will provide much needed housing in a very sustainable location. So Heavy Tree Road, as I'm sure you all know, is on a main thoroughfare into the city centre. It's 5 minutes walk from the city centre. Time that myself. I am a fast walker, nevertheless. It's on a bus route, so the students will be able to get to the college. The college is opposite the main campus at Streatham, is a bus ride away. They can get into the city centre. So it is a very sustainable location. It's also a brownfield site, so we're optimising brownfield land in this development, which is a really important consideration for a city that wants to be sustainable. This proposes building at a higher density. Now, your officers believe that that's appropriate in this location because of the factors that I've just explained. So this is the kind of place that you'd want to see a higher density solution, particularly as that gateway. Now, this is a gateway site into the city centre, so it's covered by, it's one of the sites that was identified in the livable Exeter proposals. So again, it's part of that kind of strategic consideration that we look at that. Now, because of the nature of the residential accommodation and the fact that it's in a highly sustainable location, this is virtually car-free as well, other than some accommodation for disabled users and servicing. So it's one of those unusual situations where this potentially will significantly contribute to your net zero carbon plan, which you published a couple of years ago, car-free. The other thing to highlight in terms of strategic considerations is the type of residential accommodation. Now, co-living does contribute to our 5-year land supply. So going back to that tilted balance, this will improve the situation if you approve this scheme tonight. Because it's co-living, we can also provide for affordable housing as well. And the government allows at least 20%, or sorry, a maximum 20% co-living can be affordable. So that contributes to that requirement. Now, both the PBSA element and the co-living element also have significant positive impacts on the city's economy, particularly the city centre. So the people that are going to live in this accommodation will be spending money in the city centre, using the city centre's facilities and services and contributing to that well-being and economic growth that Exeter has. A really important consideration. There's also some wider strategic considerations, particularly with that student accommodation. We're really fortunate, aren't we, in Exeter? We have a fantastic university, world-class university. That university contributes to the city's economy and its growth in so many ways. It also contributes to the learning and the entitlement that this city has for being net zero carbon by undertaking key research in the environmental sciences and in global warming. So having a university that's successful is massively important to the city and the city's ambition. That university is growing, like the city is growing, and it's growing in its student population, and it needs to cater for that student population. Your officers believe the best way of catering for that accommodation is in purpose-built use, rather than those students trying to find other accommodation across the city, usually in houses of multiple occupation. Your officers believe that the better way of providing for that student accommodation, that growth of the university, is through this type of development. So they're the strategic considerations for you tonight. I just want to dwell again on the co-living element. As I've already mentioned, co-living does benefit the city. But there are concerns about the type of environment that you're creating in a co-living sort of situation. What I would say with this application is that with significant intervention from your officers, the space standards in this scheme have been improved over the lifetime of the application. So all of the studios now that are available here are at least 18 square metres. That's not great, I will absolutely accept that, but it's of a standard that we've accepted already on previous schemes in the city. Coupled with that, you do have very significant communal space as part of the co-living. This is just an example of an extract of the lower ground floor layout that shows the kind of accommodation that is being provided as part of that co-living. Okay. So let's talk about the design, because I know that design is one of the key considerations for you tonight and should be. So your officers have spent a long time with the applicants and their applicants team on this scheme. We've responded to lots of concerns and objections that have been raised by third parties, including the civic society. What we have now is a series of responses to those issues and concerns. So the scheme that you see tonight is a scheme that's been significantly amended. Firstly, the building footprint. So this building line is brought forward compared to that previous site, the site that is currently in use, significantly brought forward, and that's to address Heavy Tree Road. But there's still a 15-metre setback, so that does allow for some softening of the buildings on the street scene. But really importantly, I think this is a gateway into the city centre. I mentioned it's 5 minutes walk. So it's kind of this is the building that you'll see as you enter Exeter from that direction. So it's really important that the footprint addresses that and creates some kind of urban edge along the street scene. There's interaction with this building. The two main entrances to the purpose-built student accommodation and the co-living are both located along Heavy Tree. So you will get that interaction. The architects has also chosen to look at a lot of the amenity space along that frontage at ground floor level. So again, that would create an interaction and an environment that you want to see in an urban context. So there will be that relationship. The heightened scale. So there's been significant negotiation on the heightened scale of this building compared to when the scheme was originally proposed as a pre-app. Where we've got to now, the building heights have been reduced significantly. They will appear as 6-storey buildings along Heavy Tree Road. This scheme has also been independently assessed by a panel of experts. 3 times it's been to design review panel. And the final design review panel, the panel did express qualified support. And I want to read out a statement that they gave at that last design review panel, which I think is really important to your considerations tonight. What the panel said was that in terms of the proposed building height, it is considered that this is at the absolute maximum that could be considered appropriate for the site location. So what that means is that this scheme optimises this brownfield site. It makes the best use of this brownfield site in an urban location. And going back to that strategic consideration, it's a really important factor. So the massing has also been looked at for this scheme. Now that corner of Gladstone Road, Heavy Tree, probably provides that bookend to the development, and we'll show some images of that in a moment. I wanted just to emphasise that has been worked on significantly as well in terms of scheme amendments and trying to break up the massing to make it more in keeping with the sorts of development that we would expect. The last thing I want to say on the design issues is that the architectural response here, it has been inspired by the surrounding context in terms of materials. So there's a contrasting use and palette of materials, but a very strong design ethic vertically. So this will appear as a good, strong urban building. And it's addressed the topography. We saw that cross section earlier where you could see that building line pick up the topography. So I think some of this is exemplified. So these views are photo images taken from the most recent of drawings that have been submitted. So they're accurate representations of what this scheme would look like. I think this is the key view. So this is a view stood on the corner opposite the Waitrose supermarket, looking down Heavy Tree Road towards the city centre. That's where the bulk of the massing is. That's where the street you will hit as you approach the site from that direction looking westwards. So you can see the relationship there, see the relationship with the street, the presence that this building gives you on that gateway location, and the strong architectural response. Compared perhaps, should I say, with the Waitrose building, you don't even see the Waitrose building in that image. I think for me, with an urban design background, that's a wasted opportunity. This is a city. You want to see buildings fronting the street in an urban setting, not bleed away into the landscape and be hidden from your perception. So this building turns that around and creates that frontage. This is a view from St. Luke's campus, so you get another sense of the sense of scale here. It looks right across the site as you can see it there. And I think you'll see there as well, you're picking up the verticality and the rhythm of the buildings that you can see.
So could you go back a slide? So it looks like it's at a different angle and not straight onto the road.
So
the first corner building, does that go in?
This one?
Yeah, that first one, the section on the very corner.
The next one along. if you go the next slide along, that corner on the right sort of curves. Does that make sense?
Is that how it's meant to be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the next few slides kind of show how well this building will blend into the background. So this is the view in the opposite direction looking up Heavy Tree Road, and you can just about pick out the building line. Interestingly, it does follow a kind of rhythm there that you can see, and you'd expect from an urban context. This is a view from Spicer Road, so this is looking directly at the co-living accommodation, and this is opposite Somerville High, which is the residential block just to the left there. These next few slides again, so this is a view down Gladstone Road, so again it just picks up the street line quite well. And then looking from Barnfield a little bit further, just to show the impacts or the lack of impact, if you like, that this scheme has in terms of how it fits into the urban context. So those are the design considerations that we've looked at. A really important local issue, of course, is residential amenity. And I mean the amenity of existing residential occupiers. We talked about the co-living. This is about people who already live here. So there's been a lot of consideration of that lower image there, which is a cross-section, kind of shows the relationship there between High Summerfields on the left there, and that first co-living block just to the right. So there's a separation there of about 18 to 20 metres already. There will be some tree planting in front of the co-living block, which will soften the appearance. The building itself is 4 stories at that point, although again it would have the appearance of a 3-storey building because of the lower ground floor. The roof has been set back as well, again to minimise the impact. And that blue dotted line is quite interesting. That's the 25-degree line that architects use. They use that as a rule to kind of judge the impact in terms of overlooking and presence to adjoining properties. Normally you'd say that any building that falls below that blue line will have a minimal impact. So the only real impact that this building will have on Summerland, is that the topmost part of the roof really, because that's the only bit that encroaches above that blue line. So that's all to do with the impact that it would have on those existing residents. It's a really important issue, has been looked at very carefully, and your officers are of a clear view that there would be no significant impact on those people that live there.
Can I read in the spec that there'd be rooms in the eaves?
So that's accommodation.
So that would be, in fact, I'm counting 8 stories.
Bob, I'm going to let Ian answer it this time, but you get questions at the end.
So the appearance is, what you've got to imagine is that the lower ground floor and the ground floor, you won't perceive those along Heavy Tree Road. It'll look like a 6-storey building. In fact, it is 8 stories. Yeah. So there are a number of other considerations. This is a big application. The officers' report details these considerations in a technical assessment. I won't read out all of that for you. You can see what they are. The main point to get out of this slide is that those technical assessments have all judged that the impacts in terms of those particular issues are going to be minimal and can be dealt with through conditions, etc. They've also been looked at by a number of statutory consultees, and their experts have looked at those particular aspects and are satisfied that with the appropriate application of conditions, that all of those issues can be addressed. So to sum up, this is an important application for Exeter. Strategic significance for its future, the delivery of Exeter's vision, the upcoming Exeter local plan has major significance. So your officers are very clear. This is a high quality design. It optimises a brownfield site in a strategic location within the city centre. It delivers substantial economic and social and environmental benefits to the city beyond the site itself. It is providing much needed accommodation for young people, students and other people who are moving on, possibly out of students, into their professional lives. Those people will be spending money in the city centre and elsewhere, helping to fuel our economy. There is an element of affordable housing as well, up to the limits that the government would allow for a scheme of this type. And as I've already mentioned, it does contribute to that 5-year housing land supply. Perhaps more as importantly as those issues is the design. Now, these buildings have been designed by a top architectural practice. They're one of the top 10 architects in the country, and they have a worldwide presence, and they're experts in this kind of accommodation. They've created a very strong, bold architecture for this scheme. It's an appropriate place in an ambitious and confident city that Exeter is to have this kind of development. We believe it will repair some of the damage that was created on the existing site and bring back some of that urban fabric and that urban presence on an important gateway into the city. We believe that the scale and massing is an appropriate response to this context. The scheme has been contextualised, it's been looked at from that surrounding local context, and we believe the response is appropriate. That conclusion has been supported by an independent panel of experts who have looked at this site. Final thing to say is that corner element, that Heavy Tree Road, Gladstone Road element, that's where the bulk of the massing is. That's the point which this scheme announces itself as you enter the city. A really important bookend and nodal point to mark that start of the city centre. So as I've said at the beginning, your officers are recommending approval. I'd go further. I would commend this application to you tonight for those reasons that we've explained. These are the detailed recommendations that are with you tonight on the report, so I won't dwell on those recommendations, other than to say thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to hearing the debate, but those are your officers' recommendations. Thank you.
Right, we're going to start with questions for Ian and Matt from the Highways Officer, and they will be questions, not statements. I've already got Councillor Branston. I'll do Moore, Mitchell, and then Fold. Councillor Branston.
You actually passed by what I think for many people in Exeter, the very serious issue of the impact on trees on this application. And the actual council's tree manager referred to the bank of trees on the western side, and he stated that these trees are a significant feature and what I'd like to know, have you a review on the tree manager's report and how many trees on the western side, and what is the total number of trees that will be removed on the rest of the site?
Matt, whichever one you want.
So I'll answer the first part of the question, which is our view about the loss of the trees. There will be significant number of trees that are going to be removed in order for this development to happen. Those trees are substantial trees. You cannot miss them as you walk up Heavy Tree Road, and they have a very strong presence. As I said, they hide what otherwise is a group of buildings that make a negative contribution to the street scene. There will be replacement trees planted in front of that new building or new set of buildings. They won't be as substantial as the existing trees, but they will have a softening impact, and there'll be an opportunity to create some biodiversity gain. We mentioned that this is an outline application with all matters considered except landscaping, so there'll be an opportunity for us to look at the landscaping in more detail and look at the biodiversity elements of that, both along Heavy Tree and within the scheme. But what we've judged is that the loss of the existing trees isn't in itself significant reason to refuse, and that we think that it's compensated for by the other improvements that are made to the visual amenity along Heavy Tree. That's our clear conclusion. In terms of the detail, number of trees lost compared to those planted, I'll hand over to Matt. I hope he's got the answer.
Well, the agricultural appraisal identifies 26 trees on the site. One will be retained, a 60-metre line behind the site, and that'll be protected during the construction, but the other trees will need to be removed to facilitate this development, because this is about fixing the urban fabric of the site first and foremost, but there will be an opportunity to get the landscaping right subsequently through the reserve matters, including taking it to design review. What I will say is a lot of the trees on site are sort of ornamental trees or cherry trees, not your sort of big grand native species, so there'll be an opportunity to get some, if you like, more ecological friendly trees on the site through the landscaping reserve matters. But this, what's before you tonight, is about fixing the urban fabric on an urban site. So it's getting the buildings and the layout right first, and then we'll come on to the soft landscaping through the reserve matters.
Well, I certainly, at one time, at one point, I'd like to know of your officer who recommended that they're in good condition, and I wanted to know if you were going to support it. But also, you mentioned 26. Is that the total number of trees that are coming down in the whole site?
No, as I just mentioned, one will be retained behind the site, a lime tree.
Yeah.
So 25 trees are on the site at present,
Right.
which will need to be removed.
Okay.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I've got 3 points, please. First of all, I wrote to Matt about the health and safety, and I just wondered if you could comment on that, because the health and safety executive produced a report, and there was a note in response to that report, but I haven't seen, in the list of the additional documents, a further updated fire safety report which covers ventilation and heat management, and also the provision of a private fire hydrant. So that's the first point. My second point is around the comments about affordable housing. The build to rent government guidance talks about 20% being a suitable benchmark, not a maximum, and so I just wondered about what efforts were made by the team to better meet the council's planning policy on affordable housing, including social housing within the development. So that's my second question. And my last question is in relation to the housing land supply that was mentioned, and I've had a look at the I spoke to you earlier about the appeal decision in Spruce Close, which talks about co-living, and says that unlike standard studio apartments more akin to other communal accommodations such as those provided by a house in multiple occupation, it seems logical and reasonable that a similar ratio be applied. So basically it's saying that it isn't 100% contribution that each unit of accommodation makes to the housing land supply, it's factored down. So the question is about, is this the most efficient use of the land?
Thanks, Councillor Moore. I did reply to you earlier today. So the issue was that we needed to consult the health and safety executive for this application due to legislation changes that came in last year to do with fire safety, and the health and safety executive raised some concerns, which we obviously had to go back to the developers, architects on, and they submitted some revised plans at the beginning of August. And then we reconsulted the Health and Safety Executive, and as is in the report, and as you will have seen online, the Health and Safety Executive have now removed effectively what was an objection and now don't have any concerns. So for this stage, for the planning application stage, they are content with the application, and the developers in their statement that they submitted at the beginning of August did refer to a fire statement. So I do know what you're talking about, but that's not been provided. Importantly, the Health and Safety Executive are aware of that, but it didn't change their conclusion that for this stage, the planning stage of the application, is satisfactory to proceed. And obviously those issues will be picked up at the detailed design stage, which would normally follow the planning application stage. So when you're preparing the building regulations drawings, which is a whole other layer of detailed drawings that would come at that stage. So importantly, the point is the Health and Safety Executive do not object to this application as per their response in August. And the next question, co-living and affordable. I mean, to be frank, we've gone over this issue on the previous applications that have come before this committee. So with the ambulance station application adjoining this site and the two co-living proposals on the Harlequins site, and the government planning practice guidance states for build to rent accommodation, you should provide 20% affordable. And because that has come after our policy, that's the approach we're taking to co-living developments in the city. So we are applying 20% affordable on co-living schemes, and we're being consistent with that approach for all co-living schemes at the moment. But importantly, as we negotiated initially on the Harlequin scheme, we are prioritising that affordable housing to key local workers. So that's something that we as officers in Exeter decided that we wanted to do with co-living proposals. So that's something we're doing and we've built into the legal agreement. On land supply, there was an appeal decision recently where the inspector did say that for co-living proposals you shouldn't count units one-to-one. At the moment, in terms of how we've been counting co-living units, we've been counting studios and cluster units as one dwelling. So we've not done the work yet to work out if we were to apply that ratio what it would work out as. It might be similar, because if you're applying a ratio to the total number of bed spaces, that might be similar to at the moment where we're counting sometimes cluster flats which have 8 bedrooms in as one unit. So the important thing is that we will be able to count the co-living accommodation towards our 5-year housing land supply, so it will contribute.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that, Councillor, the really fundamental point about your question is that irrespective of that, the current situation as we sit here tonight is that we do not have a 5-year land supply in the city. The Spruce Close appeal confirmed that, and arguably has made that situation worse. As Matt said, there's a calculation and there's some assumptions. We need to work through that, but that doesn't take away the basic fact is that we do not have currently, sadly, a 5-year land supply. So the tilted balance does apply to this scheme.
Can I just, sorry, Councillor Mitchell and everyone behind, do you mind if I just be chair and push in front? If that's the case, which I understand it is completely, but as a planning committee, we are allowed to refuse applications even though we don't have a 5-year land supply. So how strong does our argument against the tilted balance need to be? If that's just genuinely, how do we level that if we're going to say no at some point? I'm not saying that we are, because we've got to that bit yet. Just a question.
So you're absolutely right, Chair. This council can make its own mind up, and that's your job as a planning committee. You take into account all of the factors in weighing up a reasonable, balanced decision. The 5-year land supply is a critical one because it impacts on future significance of that decision should it be a refusal, because it will make the case that much more difficult to defend. However, setting aside that, our view is very clear that irrespective of the 5-year land supply issue, on all the other factors that are there for you to consider, on all of your policies in your existing adopted local plan, your office believes this is more than an acceptable form of development. It's a sustainable development in its own right, irrespective of the 5-year land supply issue.
Right, Councillor Mitchell, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just 4 short points of clarification, I hope. In the report, you referred to in your opening points, you stated that there are 358 units of co-living, and the document also refers to 677 units of student accommodation, making 1,035 in total on the site. You mentioned in the paperwork that the number of co-living properties have gone up from 352 from the initial. You don't quote a figure for the original number of PBSA units. So could you give us an indication of whether that has gone up as well?
I'll just have to check the accommodation schedule and I'll come back to you before the end of the
So
day,
do you know
if
whether
that's
it's
okay.
increased? Has there been an increase or a decrease? Or just
I can't tell. I don't think it would have changed significantly, but let me just be precise.
Just
to
there
get
was an
the
increase in
figure.
the co-living. All right, that's a quick one. Second one is in relation to the Heritage Officer's report on page 49. He makes reference to St Luke's Chapel, which is not listed, but is a heritage building as far as the community are concerned, and because of wartime damage cannot be listed, and talks about the visual impact of this development upon that. Now, that is the closest unit of building to this development, in that the St Luke's College itself is set back. Have you got an illustration that shows anything on the visual impact across the road of both units of accommodation? Because the only picture you show was a beautiful grass area at the front of St Luke's, but you didn't actually show St Luke's, and I'd like to see a visualisation of St Luke's in relation to this, because of the massing of the 8 stories against the 2 stories in effect of St Luke's across the road, and just wonder what visual impact that has on St Luke's, which is, shall we say, a historic monument as far as the town is concerned. So have we got any image in that area showing that?
So all the information that we've used to assess this application is summarised and contained in that design and access statement which we talked about earlier this afternoon. In terms of the impact on St Luke's, that's been looked at by our heritage officer, and notwithstanding the fact that this is not a listed building, this site is not within a conservation area, therefore those legislative considerations do not apply. His view very clear was that there would not be a significant detrimental impact on the setting of St Luke's.
So that's the same as meaning the proposed development would harm the setting of this asset?
Not to the significance of refusing the application. So the impact is not significant enough.
So you've got no visualisation that we as members can see the impact
Not
of
on
this?
that, not on those slides. We'd have to look
Right.
through the application documentation, I'm afraid. But that what I'm trying to say is that has been assessed at a detailed level by our conservation officer.
With reference to that, Councillor Mitchell, there are sites where I worry that we've not seen them. I don't think this site is one that any of us can claim we've not had a good look at. in the
It's just the
past.
visual
Yeah.
impact of trying to get
So I'm
across
quite
it.
happy.
Right. Third point, on page 40, you make reference to effectively non-material consideration, but you point out where we've got other co-living applications approved in the city, even if they haven't been developed yet. But you make no reference to other PBSA developments, and this is a PBSA and co-living development. Have we any indication of how many bed spaces permissions have already been granted and are outstanding at the moment?
I'm not sure we have that information at hand, but
No, I mean, you'd have to specify the dates if you want to know about.
Well, we
ones
know
that
we've got
have been done.
Harlequin, we know we've got the King Billy, there's other sites that have not yet been developed.
Exactly, some
Yeah.
haven't been built, some
Yeah.
have consent. You know, we could go away and find out for you, but we don't have that information to hand.
what we do know, though, is that having spoken to the university wants to grow. It wants to increase its student population for those reasons that I explained about the role it has as a top institution in the country and the world, to fulfil its potential for the city, it needs to bring more students in. It wants to provide accommodation for those students. It would prefer to provide that accommodation in purpose-built accommodation, as opposed to the alternative, which would be for those students to go it alone and try and find their own accommodation in houses of multiple occupation, which in our view has a much more significant harmful impact.
You've almost telepathy guessed the last question. I was going to ask, has the university made any formal submission in regard to this application, considering it owns St Luke's campus opposite, which could easily accommodate 1,000 units of accommodation if they wish to redevelop it?
I'd let the representation go. We're only deciding the application before us.
Yeah, I just asked if the university.
So we don't need to suggest where else
that's all.
we'd put it.
Yeah.
And please stop asking questions. I'm trying to be sound completely neutral, and I feel like I keep having to come back at you. And the point that relates to the student numbers, the last time planning member working group brought the student numbers, there was a significant deficit between the 50% we were looking at, I think, with the original plan. We had not hit that. And also, like you say, it's not a material consideration in this application.
Through you, Chair, just to answer your earlier question, Councillor, the original number of PBSA rooms was 689 when it was submitted, according to the design analysis statement.
Yeah. Yeah, six.
Councillor Fold.
Thank you. Chair, I'm confused because it's just a year since I was last on planning committee for a number of years, and only 2 years since I was the portfolio holder for city development. But we seemed at that time to be moving towards the idea of co-living rather than co-living and student accommodation being very separate entities. And looking through the application, I didn't understand why the two of them would be separated out in such a way, with nearly 700 of the 1,000 plus things being student only, and the danger of perhaps ghettoising students, and that against a backdrop where it was considered that there was enough student accommodation only a couple of years ago, and a background perhaps a lot of extra people saying there's already enough students. But I wondered where that change of thinking or how that impacted on the application.
Firstly, as a former portfolio holder, we have no control over the expansion of Exeter University, so it's not relevant to this application at all. Secondly, my knowledge of this application is it's always been a joint application for co-living and student accommodation, but might know more than I do.
Yeah, they've always included a mix of student accommodation and co-living. So that's since I've been involved, that's been the case all through the pre-app and the application stage. And obviously, as Ian said, the number of students are increasing. Irrespective of the amount of PBSA accommodation being provided, the number of students are increasing who've got to live somewhere. And at the moment, your adopted policy, CP5 of the core strategy, does support the delivery of purpose-built student accommodation. So that is in the development plan. So from a planning perspective, in principle, it's acceptable.
Thank you.
Unless anyone else can put their hands up. Finally, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Firstly, am I right in saying that from Higher Summerland side it's 18 metres at its minimum, the distance? Now, is that a distance from the back walls at the end of the Higher Summerland's garden, or is that 18 metres from their back doors? That's the first question. And is there an illustration, an actual photographic illustration taken from Higher Summerland's looking at the side of the co-living proposal?
No, the developers haven't produced a CGI image of the proposal looking directly from the rear of those residential properties to the west. Obviously, they provided the section drawing that's on the screen now, and I think the design access statement refers to 80 square metres. I've measured it directly off the latest plans this afternoon. The separation distance is around 18. It does vary up to 20 metres, 19, because the elevations do change slightly.
Is it from the back walls of the Summerland's gardens, or is it from the back walls of the Higher Summerland's houses?
From the back of the houses is what's measured. That's the normal way of measuring.
So it is less than 18 metres from the ends of their gardens in some places.
Yes, I mean, looking at the plan, the rear gardens are quite small,
Yes.
but yeah, that's what that figure is referring to.
So is it more accurate to say that it's really some roughly 15 metres from the bottoms of the Higher Summerland's garden?
That would be accurate, but that would be not the measurement that is used to make the decision.
Moving swiftly on, Exeter prides itself on having garden city principles. That's what makes Waitrose so delightful. It's got some nice green spaces and trees. This does not accord with Exeter's garden city principles, it would seem, because when you showed the image looking down from Gladstone Road, it was difficult to see how that was 15 metres, I think you said 15 metres back from the footpath. It seemed to me to be right on the footpath. It was the first picture you showed. That one, yeah. That doesn't look as though there's 15 metres between the curb, the ends of the footpath, and the start of the block.
I think that it increases the footpath, doesn't it? That's why.
The measurement from the front of the elevation to the back of the footway is going to be vary from, I've measured it 7.5 metres to just over 6 metres, and then right on the corner about 3 metres.
Yeah. So, can you explain how that accords with our garden city principles?
The garden city principles cover a whole range of issues. The fact that this is a brownfield site that optimises the use of that in terms of its high density to optimise that use. That's a principle. It's also in terms of its impact on the economy. Sustainability is an economic and social and environmental concept. So it impacts positively on the economy. There is the opportunity, as we've said, in the landscaping for biodiversity net gain. Before that becomes a legal requirement, we've got that opportunity. So it hits on that. I would include in that planting of more sustainable, if you like, tree species, as Matt's explained. It's a car-free development, so in terms of probably the biggest impact of all in terms of a garden city, this is contributing to the city's net zero carbon city plan. That's a garden city principle.
I won't debate that with you, because I think we all have experience of car-free developments where the cars are left in. I want to come on to another issue. In the officer's report, it talks about key workers. You've just mentioned this in respect to the Harlequins development. That's going to be at affordable rents, isn't it? So we know affordable rents are 80% of the market rent that will be otherwise charged. Bearing in mind, we know that the student PBSAs are over 1,000 a month. We can assume that you're talking of an affordable rent of 800-ish a month. That's well outside the scope of most key workers. So it really is a little misleading to say that this is going to benefit key workers. And the last point is that I note that landscape, it is a landscape, it is a question. It is, well, one, this is outside the range. The second question is that the recent 2021 Court of Appeal decision made it clear that if outline permission is granted, then it is difficult to really do much about that. We're reserving landscaping. Now, a lot has been talked about landscaping. If the developer doesn't want to play ball with the landscaping, there's not a lot we can do about it at that stage because of that Court of Appeal decision. Wouldn't it be better to wait until the landscaping formed part of the application so that we had control over it?
Yeah. So the question about the reserve matters. Landscaping is reserved. That means we have full control and consideration over that reserve matter before full planning permission is granted. So I completely disagree with you on our ability to affect that. Having said that, a very detailed landscape strategy has been submitted as part of the application for consideration for information, and that's something to build on. I think we can improve on that, frankly, and we can look quite hard at the biodiversity net gain opportunity there. I think, for example, within those courtyard areas, they're creating a potential woodland environment. I'd like to see that looked at in more detail as opposed to an ornamental. I think the people who live there will get more benefit from that. We have full control over that when the reserve matters application is submitted. Until reserve matters is approved, there isn't full consent, and so we have absolute control over that. Sorry, I forgot what your first question was now.
That wasn't one.
No.
It was.
It
It was.
was.
I did tell you that this is not aimed at key workers. That is misleading because of the level of rents that are likely to be charged.
Still sounded like a statement, but
Yeah.
if there's a question, we'll try and answer it.
I'm gonna leave that one because the information, we don't know what the rents will be charged. We haven't been told, so we can't make that assumption. Right, I'm going to move on to Councillor speaking under Standing Order number 44, for which we've got Councillor Jemima Moore and Councillor Vizard. Have you two got any idea which order you'd like to do this in, or do you want me to pick a name? Okay, Councillor Vizard first. You've both been to planning committees before, you know the rules. There is no time limit, but don't feel you have to challenge Councillor Branston for the longest statement ever made.
He's welcome to that record. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. You've had the sales pitch, now hear what the feeling on the ground is. This is a major application for you this evening, which, while it's a private development, will have a serious role in defining the city's aspirations for development of the key Heavitree Road corridor under the livable Exeter plans. While I understand the need to maximise capital receipts in these straitened times, it is disappointing that the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office should grant an option to a tender that proposes a high profit, low aesthetic contribution to a key corridor in the city by seeking to impose two monolithic blocks rather than an alternative high quality, sustainable green development in keeping with the council's own visions for its city. While you can only consider what is in front of you, a high quality development of family homes would have generated far less local objection. However, what is in front of you this evening is an application for two monolithic blocks for students and co-living that would eliminate more or less the existing green tree-lined buffer to Heavitree Road, would impact severely on the residents of Higher Summerlands and St Matthew's Close, and clash horribly with the St Luke's Campus University site and the surrounding conservation areas, of which there are 3. We all know the pressures and public sensitivities that come with student development. The city has to provide purpose-built student housing to meet the need of a massively increased student population that is outside of this council's control, as we've heard. Or we would see an overwhelming conversion of family homes to HMOs across the city centre wards. But I am concerned about the spread of PBSA from the city centre Paris Street quarter, where it is at least contained and has somewhat improved the street scene and minimises impact on residential areas, to Heavitree Road, which runs through the much loved neighbourhoods of Newtown and St Leonard's on either side. With co-living comes a reduced percentage of affordable housing, as we've heard, in this case 0 SIL liability, and a huge additional burden on local amenities, given that the proposed courtyard areas, and I quote, would not alone adequately cater for the outdoor amenity of residents. Let's remember also that not a single co-living flat has yet come online in Exeter, making this an unproven model for lower cost housing. Turning to the scale and massing of the blocks, Despite the amendments to the scheme, this remains a huge development that would fundamentally change the landscape of the area. Its blandly modern, suffocating frontage would dominate and jar badly with the historic and much admired architecture and aesthetics of the St Luke's campus building opposite, and with the surrounding St Leonard's, Lower Summerlands and Mont Le Grand conservation areas. A blot on the landscape, in fact, and as the council's own heritage officer has said, in fact, this development would harm the setting of the locally listed St Luke's Chapel building. Had it at least attempted to retain the grass and tree-lined buffer to the edge of the road, that would have better followed the good example of the Waitrose and Atlas House sites, which are both set back with some soft landscaping and trees and a more pleasing visual amenity. The long-standing residents of modest mixed housing on Higher Summerlands and St Matthew's Court would be faced with a looming block just a few metres away, overbearing and intrusive, a loss of vital visual amenity that will dominate their landscape. This is not an appropriate scale and massing, regardless of design choices around windows or gable ends, and for the sakes of these residents, should be refused. They are desperate for you to do so this evening to restore their faith in the planning process. The mature tree loss and associated harm to biodiversity is not mitigated by the new planting on site, and the loss of the trees on the Heavitree Road frontage will be felt very acutely by residents and visitors to the area. Replacing tree and grass-lined road frontages with concrete and steel is literally not a good look. Do you really believe these charmless blocks built so brutally against the pavement and road would meet the aims of the National Planning Policy Framework in achieving well-designed places? Namely, that they will function well and add to the overall quality of the area, not just for the short term, but over the lifetime of the development. Are visually attractive as a result of good architecture, layout, and appropriate effective landscaping. Are sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting, while not preventing or discouraging appropriate innovation or change, such as increased densities. Establish or maintain a strong sense of place using the arrangement of streets, spaces, building types, and materials to create attractive, welcoming, and distinctive places to live, work, and visit. I would strongly contend that this application would not meet any of these criteria and so provides solid grounds for refusal. Furthermore, consider the impact on the area of the sheer volume of additional residents. Newtown and St Leonard's welcomes new people, but local amenities are already stretched. We have read in the report how inadequate the planned outside space on this site will be, and so while I note the contribution to local amenities in the form of enhancements, we cannot literally increase the size of Belmont Park. Any game-changing development on this scale needs much clearer thought about the provision of outside space and local amenity. I would argue that we will need additional community green space to provide the health and well-being needs of our community with the additional homes and residents we are likely to see over the next 20 years. This application does not even begin to address that, and so also fails on the next of the NPPF criteria, namely to optimise the potential of the site to accommodate and sustain an appropriate amount and mix of development, including green and other public space, and support local facilities and transport networks, and create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, and which promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users, and where crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or community cohesion and resilience. Now, okay, I'm not arguing that this development will create an increase in crime and disorder, so it perhaps meets half of one of the 6 NPPF criteria, provided the police recommendations were carried out. The point is that even with Section 106 contributions, this application does not meet the needs of the public realm or local amenity. It would be far better if the site owner and developer were to consult with the City Council and bring forward the kind of sustainable garden city concept set out in the Livable Exeter vision. Through that vision, the Council rightly aspires to an excellence in architectural design, sustainable new homes, and a greener environment with more public outside spaces. This is not that vision. As it stands, a key site that could be a beacon of good design for this model and set the ball rolling for the garden city we aspire to, would instead inflict a hugely damaging blow to our bold and imaginative vision before it has even begun. Indeed, it could be argued that this site is of such significance and importance, it needs a site-specific policy and extensive discussions to ensure the development brought forward is suitable. I urge planners and developers to return to the table to discuss something that truly enhances the area, the community, our health and well-being and visual amenity. So there are serious concerns about the scale, mass, design, impact on local amenity and on neighbouring residents, and its failure to meet the livable Exeter vision. If you have any concerns as planning members about whether this is the right development for this landmark site, whether it has the potential to harm this city gateway and the local community, as I do as a local resident and a councillor, please vote against it this evening. We cannot afford to get this wrong. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vizard. Do we have any questions for Councillor Vizard? Councillor Moore.
Thank you. We can't just have a little chat. Thank you. You mentioned a number of times the amenity outside. I just wondered if you had a view on the amenity for the proposed occupants of the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's described as courtyards. I think clearly there is a reserved matter still to be discussed in terms of the landscaping, so that's could be improved, but I don't think it's sufficient. It mentions it in the report. It's not sufficient for or adequate for the needs of 1,000+ people. So they need somewhere to go, and that's, as I say, I think that is where it impacts on other parts of our local community. And Belmont Park is our only local park on that side of the road. We do have Bournemouth on the other side, so but they're already under strain. And I think if you land another 1,000 people in an area, and there will be more, we know that, and that's fine. We understand the need for development and housing, and some of it will be in our ward. Then you need to address that up front. And I think this not only doesn't do that. I appreciate we can only look at what's in front of us this evening, but it actually actively makes it worse. So I think it's detrimental. I don't think, from what I can see of the design, that there's sufficient outside space for people, other than some rather enclosed courtyards, which I don't think does the job.
Thank you, Councillor Vizard. Councillor Moore.
It's clear that the police station site needs to be developed and that housing is a good option for the space, but there are a multitude of reasons why the proposed development is not right. It's not right for this site, it's not right for the people of Exeter or for the development's future residents. This development is huge, overbearing and in no way sympathetic to or in keeping with its surroundings. It's not in keeping with the attractive St Luke's campus or nearby housing. In fact, the only development that it is in keeping with is the co-living development under construction on Gladstone Road. Unlike the building on Gladstone Road, this development will entirely change the feel of a key route into our city. It is also significantly larger and higher. Our green tree-lined banks will be replaced by oppressive looming buildings. While this site is classified as brownfield, it has a substantial green presence with mature trees which provide an important continuity of a green corridor from Poleslow Road towards the city centre. The tree-lined bank creates an open and pleasant feel and is a welcome relief against the busy road. This development pushes to build to the very edge of the site, entirely disregarding the importance of the green spaces which make up large parts of the area to be developed. The loss of our inner city trees and nature is a loss to us all. While mitigation measures will mean that replacement trees are planted, it is disappointing that members are not presented with a plan for the planting that will be included within the landscaping of the outside area. We don't know which replacement trees will be planted or where. The destroyed trees will be replaced on a one-to-one basis, but of course it is likely that our beautiful established trees will be replaced by far smaller specimens, which will take many years to reach a similar size, presuming that they're given the space to do so. The blossoming of the trees along Hevertree Road has brought much joy as they signal the beginning of spring, and I feel deeply sad at the thought of them being cut down. Once these trees and slivers of green space are gone, they will never be replaced, making our city a greyer place to live. This development is not so needed that it can justify the destruction of the current natural spaces. This is a scheme where profits have been maximised at the cost of everything else. This space could be used to provide proper-sized housing designed around the well-being needs of its residents and its surrounding neighbours. It could be a more in keeping size to the surrounding area and leave the green space and trees protected. If what was best for people or nature was put first, we would be presented with an entirely different scheme. Sadly, as it is, the desire to make as much money as possible out of this piece of land has obviously been at the forefront of its design. The disabled access highlights this lack of focus on the needs of future residents. The disabled parking is at the back of the building, while the disabled access to the building itself is all the way around to the front of the block, not at all well thought through or convenient for those with mobility issues. This development decimates almost all of the green space on the current site, and I feel sad for the future residents who will have to have just the small courtyards as their outdoor space. Like Councillor Vizard, I'm also concerned that once occupied, this huge development will put pressure on our nearby parks and green spaces. Belmont Park is often extremely crowded, particularly in the summer, with groups competing to find space for football and other activities. Many nearby green spaces, such as Clifton Hill Golf Driving Range, were mistakenly identified by the developers as open green space which residents might use. These are not green spaces that are open, though, and I agree with Councillor Vizard that a financial contribution towards park maintenance cannot make the space any larger, and that the developer should contribute towards identifying and then maintaining other open green space options in order to avoid overcrowding in our nearby parks. As well as having very limited outdoor space, residents of this development will have living spaces with windows on just one side of their room. I feel most sorry for those residents who would look out onto Heavitree Road, which is located within an air quality management area. Their only windows and source of outdoor air will come from beside this air polluted road. Residents within the property also have unidirectional windows. I think the aerial view probably best shows, I don't know if you can put that up, a view from above, shows just how close in proximity the windows will overlook each other. These are the only windows in these properties. Imagine having your only windows overlooked so closely, not by one neighbour, but potentially hundreds, and having no other options of windows to look out of. These narrow courtyards, sorry, not that one, but yeah, the one before, yeah, there. So these narrow courtyards mean that windows facing each other are just 15 metres apart. The established national standard between onlooking aspects is 22 metres. Accepting a scheme with this level of crowding would set a precedent for Exeter. The repercussions are considerable and unknown. Would this precedent allow private residents to continue this rule when extending houses, for instance? Perhaps the planning team need this to be discussed further. Surely being a co-living development doesn't make this intervisibility between the private apartments acceptable. The future residents should be entitled to greater privacy and not be so closely overlooked. I agree with Councillor Vizard that a pedestrian crossing on Gladstone Road is much needed, but I'm concerned about the plans for this. The Gladstone Road Heavitree Junction is a pinch point. Please see, is there a view that shows? Yeah, probably that's the best one. I don't think there's any view that properly shows it. The crossing is proposed to be positioned where the pavement narrows to only 3.5 metres. Here, pedestrians waiting to cross the road to Waitrose will have to share a pavement with groups of students moving between lectures, whilst also contending for space with cyclists using this as a cycle path in two directions. This doesn't seem safe, and it's easy to imagine the possible accidents that could occur on a busy day when pedestrians wait at the crossing while cyclists move in both directions. It's frustrating that the Gladstone Road co-living development has now set a precedent for this low standard of housing. This must not be the new standard that is set. Members must expect better, both for the current residents who will live nearby this monstrous development and for the new residents who will be paying huge amounts to live in such poor standard of property. The Gladstone Road development certainly wasn't. The Gladstone Road development certainly wasn't voted through with enthusiasm. In fact, many members voted against it. Some abstained, and those who did vote it through seemed to do so out of fear of the appeals process rather than any real belief in the quality of the development. It was and still is wrong to approve permanent dwellings of just 18 centimetres squared, which is under national space standards. I understand the co-living concept, but believe that it's untested and unlikely to provide comfortable living conditions which meet people's wellbeing needs. The suggestion that this development will free up family-sized homes from being houses of multiple occupancy seems unlikely. I was shocked to see the Gladstone Road development's bedsits advertised for between £926 and £1,106 per month. This is not affordable, and renting a 3 or 4 bedroom house with friends will continue to be a far more affordable option and provide students with gardens and communal spaces which are shared with a few friends rather than hundreds of strangers. Why would they choose to pay more for less space? I urge members of the Planning Committee to hold high standards of housing for the people of Exeter, to protect our trees and green spaces, and to reject the proposed development. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Councillor Moore? Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I've got a similar question I asked to Councillor Vizard. You talked about the internal amenity and small size. The developer is proposing a shared communal space amounting to 2.2 metres squared per dwelling. And what's your view on that? And I just wonder, Chair, if Devon County Council can speak through the issues on the crossing that the councillor raised so that we can be fully appraised of the situation.
I'll start with Councillor Moore on the
So I think anybody with any idea of what humans need to feel happy and okay in their lives would probably know that having a space that small as their outdoors living space is not acceptable. We wouldn't have zoo animals kept in conditions like that, and we are animals. However evolved we may be and living in cities, we still need to have space of our own to be in, or acceptable shared spaces. But yeah, I think it's shocking really, and I would feel really, really sorry for anyone moving into these apartments. I think that our mental health crisis will only continue with housing like this. I don't think it meets people's wellbeing needs.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back to the points raised with regards to the crossing, we have looked at the information as part of the application. It's been through the safety process and the safety team. We've taken all of the information into account that was provided as part of the planning application, and it wouldn't be fair to recommend refusal from the Highway Authority under the NPPF with regards to the crossing. Obviously, we've had detailed conversations through the planning process with the applicant as to regards to the crossing, which will be looked at, and obviously any sort of crossing that's implemented, safety would be one of the primary concerns that we look at to make sure that anything implemented wouldn't represent anything detrimental to the highway safety through pedestrians, non-motorised users or vehicles along that stretch of road and carriageway.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moore. Oh, Councillor Moore. Who's the question for?
I just wanted to clarify what's just been said, if that's okay. Because there's two different things that have been said. One is that you wouldn't want to stop the application just on this ground, but you didn't say whether the proposals as made on the crossing you felt were safe and appropriate.
As part of the application, there would be no reason for us to recommend refusal on that. As I said, we've deemed that, as it wouldn't represent any sort of safety implications, that we as the Highway Authority couldn't recommend a refusal to the local planning authority for the applications that have been put forward.
I think that's the answer you're going to get. Okay, so now we've got representations from members of the public. First of all, we've got the objector, which is Jeff Tipping. I think, Mr. Tipping? Yes. Still here. Okay, it's all right, don't worry. Take it on. You've got 3 minutes. I'm afraid, unlike the councillors, we do limit you in time, and I will give you a shout as we run out. I do tend to be strict on this, but I'm like it with everybody, so you know you're not getting the worst end of the stick, I promise.
Can I just speak a little bit before the clock starts?
Not really, no. But you had, was it Mr. Tipping's plans that we gave out, yeah. So we circulated those for you earlier, so I can say that, but you can't, okay? There you go.
Good afternoon, members. If you're not already minded to refuse this application, I'm hoping to be able to tilt some of you in that direction. Do not be concerned that there are no substantive reasons to refuse this application. There are. Your local plan, say policy H5, should be sufficient on its own. In addition, the site is referred to constantly by the case officer as a brownfield site. Not all of this site is brownfield, and only the developed footprint and circulation should be considered as such. Also, the City of Exeter is making excellent green policies on the environment, carbon reduction, public open space, etc. Just around the corner at Clifton Hill, there is a pledge to keep the open space, trees and many other sound, balanced initiatives, so why not here as well? The granting of this application will be seen by many to undermine these policies. Policy H5. The conversion of dwellings to flats, self-contained bedsits or houses in multiple occupation and the development of special needs or student housing will be permitted. That's development of student housing will be permitted, provided that the proposal will not create an over-concentration of the use in any one area of the city, which would change the character of the neighbourhood or create an imbalance in the local community. Why does the planning officer's report heading Planning Assessment Key Issues, numbered paragraph 10, not even mention this policy? It is cited in number 12 as a relevant policy. It is the scale, massing, height and total loss of all existing habitat that is so wrong with this proposal. In short, it is a greedy scheme that grabs every inch of the site and rises to 8 stories above it. Circulation roads are pushed to the very edge. The visual impact on the neighbouring properties will be intolerable. The impact on Higher Summerlands is the most extreme. When the Magistrates' Court and Police Station were first developed following the destruction of many fine Georgian houses, the planners at the time had the good sense to set out some open space on the steeply upward sloping land and to plant it with many trees. This green lung and habitat should be protected for all time and not cast aside in a hunt to maximise the number of student housing units. The test of developing green open space in the city centre should be similar to developing greenbelt, e.g. the impact the development has and evidence of very special circumstances to justify the loss of the land. Protecting city centre wildlife habitat should be at the core of any emerging green carbon neutral policy. A very high bar and weighting should be used to justify the loss of any tree in the city centre. Yet I have seen no arguments other than, oh well, I suppose you can't develop the proposal without their destruction. No, this is not justification. Clearly a smaller scheme can retain all the trees. However, it's not only the 100% site coverage that's so offensive, it's the overall height, some additional 3 floors higher than the gorge, which itself was pushing design parameters too hard. There are good views from Summerland Street, where you can see the top of St Matthew's and the gorge now rising above. Oh dear, oh dear. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
I'll let you off that line. Are there any questions specifically? Okay, thank you very much for your time. And speaking in favour, I've got Nicola Allen, I think. Is that right? Thank you very much. Same rules for you in 3 minutes and I will cut you. Thank you. And you can come back 1 second. Okay, as soon as you start, we'll press go.
Okay, good evening. I'm Nikki Allen, the Treasurer for Alison Hernandez, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Devon, Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. The Commissioner is the owner of the estate, and in my role I have responsibility for the police estate across the Force area. The Commissioner would like to thank the Planning Authority for their engagement during the process, along with the police estates team and the development, the developer, Student Roost and Brookfield. This has resulted in the application you have before you today. The application before you covers the use of the former Heightened Police Station and court site. The Commissioner is pleased to note that the application is recommended for approval and understands the due diligence to be undertaken by the Planning Committee and respects your right to decide. In order to select the right developer for this site, a robust process was undertaken by both the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner in partnership with Devon and Cornwall Police Force and the Court Service. This included considering and interviewing a number of potential applicants and associated submissions. Exeter City's Planning Authority, as said earlier, were extremely accommodating and actively involved in the initial discussions with potential developers at the submission stage. This was extremely useful when looking at the right fit for the site and for the City of Exeter. The developer combination of Brookfield and Student Roost was decided to be the best mix based on the feedback from the City Council and not the resultant capital receipt. This development meets the needs of Exeter and will be one of the highest quality residential schemes. The pandemic has made this an incredibly challenging few years. Unfortunately, we now enter a further difficult phase with the cost of living impacting those across the region. The Commissioner is always pleased to support economic regeneration for the City and to support building on brownfield sites to enhance and grow the City of Exeter for its communities. This development will bring in around £100 million of investment to the City and will result in new additional jobs during the construction and operational phase. This will also bring in about £500,000 worth of SIL funding. The closure of the former police station and custody suite at Heightened Road has resulted in the development of the new Exeter police station and custody suite on the Middlemore site. The Heightened Road building was at capacity, very outdated and no longer suitable to provide 21st century police services. The former police station would not have allowed for growth and provided the right type of environment for the public, officers, staff and detainees. The new £30 million facility at Middlemore is state-of-the-art and one of the most sustainable buildings in the UK. This has been coupled with a local policing presence for the city centre, permanently located here in the Civic Centre building. We hope you are pleased with the changes that have been made, and this has proven to be a successful co-location move. The police estate is a vital aspect of policing infrastructure and essential to promoting accessibility and visibility across the area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Moore.
Thank you. This is clearly publicly owned land, a publicly owned site. Could you tell us what consultations prior to approaching developers you as a public body took with the local authority, the university or the local community?
I don't think I'm in a position to give that level of detail. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
So you don't know, or you're not?
At this point, no, I haven't got that to hand. Sorry.
You can find out probably.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I've got that to hand.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you. May I? Thank you. Just want to ask similar questions I asked the councillors about amenity for the residents in the building, within the building, not the outside space. We've heard that from people already. So the planning conditions say that the internal spaces shouldn't be subdivided. Will all the internal amenity spaces, the common spaces, remain free to use for residents in perpetuity, or will they have to hire them as bolt-ons to their rent? And in terms of the affordable housing element, there isn't a condition which often happens in other planning applications for the affordable housing to be conditioned that it's available in perpetuity, and that there is work with the council to negotiate who gets that affordable accommodation. So the two issues.
Thank you. It is my understanding that the co-living will be in perpetuity. I'm looking to the planning department because they've got
the
communal area. Sorry,
free to use.
It's my understanding that it will be.
And just I think to help you out a little bit, because I've just checked the officers, the 106 agreement will assure the affordable housing remains affordable.
So could both of these things be added as formal things within this decision, and should that be approved?
I suppose we can. It's approved, but it will be part of the 106 agreement.
The officer recommendation is that a section 106 legal agreement should accompany permission if granted, and that includes affordable housing.
And the amenity to be free.
It doesn't say anything about that in the conditions at all, and in the gorge one, you have to hire separate rooms for.
Sorry, in the gorge you have to hire rooms on the advertising. So we need to make sure that at 2.2 metres squared, communal per head, that the amenity is free to use in perpetuity, and that is part of the conditions, because otherwise that could be hired, be a requirement that it be hired out, or some of it.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. I'm going to take a break in a minute. for everybody's benefit. And while we're doing that, I'm going to talk to the officers and legal just to get a point of view on whether that's considered reasonable enough to be in the conditioning, because our conditions have to be reasonable and achievable. So everybody, thank you, Nicola. That's the end of that. I think that was everyone's asked a question, haven't they? Did you ask yours? Yes, you did. Yeah, so we're gonna, no you didn't. We're gonna have a break for 5 to 10 minutes, so come back as soon as you can and I will have a conversation during that for you, okay?
By association.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, I've got my full committee back, so I'm going to open the item for debate. Who would like to go first? Oh, go on. Councillor Fold, then Councillor Newby, and I'll work from there.
Thank you, Chair. I heard several times this evening about the need for the 5-year land supply. And that's laudable, but it shouldn't be a green light for any big buck, huge development. When I'm looking at those plans, in my mind's eye, I'm looking at the towering blocks that stick up over St Sidwell's Point. And although that could be argued it's not so residential area, I'm sort of transferring that to dead opposite St Luke's College, and I'm looking at 6 to 8 stories, and I'm just thinking another car bunker on the backside of Exeter. And I'm sorry, there's no way that I can support this.
Councillor Fold, Councillor Newby.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, this is to the team across the road here. There's nothing on the paperwork that says about dry risers as we're 8 floors high. Are these going to be implemented for the fire service to use? Because from my experience, 8 floors is a long way to go. Trust me.
Yeah, I mean, as a result of new legislation, it's now a requirement to consult the Health and Safety Executive on fire safety on buildings of a certain height, which is clearly what we've done, complying with the regs. And the Health and Safety Executive have come back saying that they have no concerns for this planning stage. What you're talking about would be dealt with through the building regulations approval stage.
Right. My other question is, the drawings that you show up there shows courtyards. Where are they going to get the sun from? Because it's quite tall and it's on a quite high area. There's very little sun going to be getting into those courtyards.
Yes, there will be shaded environments, and obviously landscaping will be chosen to suit that environment.
Not very good for someone's well-being. I think this pandemic has shown that a bit of sunshine and a bit of greenery does work wonders.
Ironically, Councillor Newby, you're asking questions in the debate bit instead of the people who debate in the question bit.
Would you agree with me?
That's still a question. I'd quite happily listen to your opinion on the courtyards, though, if you think that's a planning matter. No, you don't need to ask questions now. You've had your moment.
Thanks.
Right, Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. Because of the 5-year housing land supply, one has to look perhaps more closely at planning grounds than one would otherwise. And I do think that when one looks at that, there are good grounds to object to refuse this scheme. I don't think it complies with much of Section 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and I don't think it complies with Policy H5, particularly B. Little b, which is that the proposal will not create an over-concentration of the use in any one area of the city which would change the character of the neighbourhood or create an imbalance in the local community. I think as far as Section 130 of the NPPF goes, they're not sympathetic to the local character and history, including the surrounding built landscape. Does it establish or maintain a strong sense of place? I would say not. It's not a welcoming or distinctive place in which to live. 18 square metres with an additional 2 square metres of amenity space. Bearing in mind the research that has been done since the pandemic about how people need light, space, room to move, this fails on all those grounds. 18 square metres is simply too small. It will adversely, I suggest, affect people's well-being and mental health. There is no immediate outside green space that might have ameliorated above. I have to say, if I was walking around one of those tiny courtyards, it must, which all you can do is will be in the shade all the time, be dark in the winter. It's not actually going to do anyone's well-being any good. It is too tiny. I don't think it concurs with our garden city expectations. The residents in Higher Summerlands are going to be significantly adversely affected. They're going to lose the mature trees. There's a site of those, which I'm sure it's lovely for them. They're going to be looking against a brick wall. They will be overlooked for windows that overlook in that direction. Those windows that overlook the courtyards, those residents will not get much daylight. And I think that one can look in that respect to, I think it's policy DG4, the quality, the amenity that allows people to feel at ease in their homes. I do not think that this development, this proposal, will allow people to feel at ease. Looking at the contributions made, you're talking of 1,000 residents being added to that area if this development goes through. There are insufficient doctors and dentists at the moment. I think I'm right in saying, was it NHS, Devon ICS, 264, 173,000 for BBSA, 91 for co-living. That's wholly insufficient to provide facilities for that number of people. I also note that there's nothing said anywhere about giving people some quiet communal spaces. The aspiration is that some of this may be for key workers. Well, key workers tend to work shifts. They won't necessarily want to come back and go into a noisy lounge with a load of other people. They will want some quiet space. And they won't necessarily want to have that in the tiny little boxes with which they've been provided. I think for the risk of allowing yet another development to go through is that it'll just bring transient single people into the city, and it will be driving local families and single residents out of the city. Co-living can only be for a single person. So what happens if that person acquires a partner? What happens if that partner has already got a couple of children? They would not be able to stay there. That would then may well mean that they have to apply to the local council for housing. That would then mean that they will become an additional number of people who are unable to get housing. I think for all those reasons, but particularly in light of the 5-year land supply, that we should look at Section 130 of the MPPF, Policy H5, Policy DRG4, and refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Braxton.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's only fair to say that I think this application has been slightly improved, and I stress on the word slightly. However, there's been over at least 114 objections from local residents, and the main issues, as we already know, relate to the design, height, and the design and as well, and light. The ECC Heritage Officer stated that the listed St. Luke's Chapel will experience the greatest change. The building is of exceptional merit, and if it had not been built after the severe the war that went on, the damage, it would at least have been a graded List 2 building. The proposed development would no doubt harm the setting of this asset. On the other hand, the Exeter Civic Society consider that the buildings are too high, they're too close to the Heavy Tree Road, both of which I agree. Reference on page 57 states that the height of the building blocks of the views of the green hills of Hull Oldham. There is no doubt that the height will have a significant impact on the 20 residents who live in Higher Summerlands, which the last speaker spoke about, and she's quite right. The very steep slope will no doubt reduce the quality of their light. This development will have a very negative impact on one of the major routes into the city centre. What a contrast from the adjacent Waitrose and the Atlas student building, which both have retained lovely frontage of open spaces, green grass and trees and bushes. This application is contrary to the climate change policy, which states that as Exeter face more pressure from development, the retention of trees should become ever more important, and that trees enhance the appearance of the city. They remove dust in the air and they absorb carbon, and just one tree can absorb up to 6 kg of CO2 every year. Finally, the ECC Public Green Spaces team stated this development provides limited garden space and little in the way of open space and play provision. The Clifton Hill Golf driving range and the Brendan School and Magdalen Court School playing fields are not local open spaces and should not have been identified as much. The information is totally incorrect and misleading by this application. There is an understanding that there was an agreement with the university that student development would be built in the inner city areas. Heavy Road is in a residential community ward. The view of this and the height, the design, the light, the issue of relating to trees, and finally what I would say that I would like to congratulate the presentations that were made by Mr. Tipping and the two local councillors. I think they've both done a terrific response, and I will have no hesitation in refusing to vote. I will vote against this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Branston. Councillor Aspash.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Can I just say it's slightly worrying to me that until Councillor Jobson touched on it slightly, no one has mentioned key workers. That site is within a 2-minute walking distance of the Hereditary site and 10-15 minutes of the Watford hospital site. So you should be looking at housing for key workers, nurses, doctors, students, even from come down for living there for a while. And also the other thing, I agree with everything that everybody else has said here. I will be voting against it, and mostly because you're losing the biodiversity in the trees. I think the Waitrose site is really, really nice to look at, and basically this is hideous. I'm sorry. That's all. Thank you.
Whenever I say things like that, officers tell me that design is subjective, so that's a reminder of what it is. Councillor Moore, I did discuss with the officers and with the legal representative, and we are not able to specifically condition the management plan for charging for rooms. We do not believe it's in the spirit of what has been offered to us, but we will look at the management plan as we go forward, but we can't specifically condition it under the law. Okay? Anyway, to your point.
Thank you. I have a number of points. First of all, I would appreciate the representative of the Police and Crime Commissioner presenting this evening, but I think it's extremely disappointing that the Commissioner didn't actually send somebody who's able to answer technical questions about this development. There was quite a number. I only asked one, maybe two, but I didn't get a satisfactory answer. I think that the provision of purpose-built student accommodation is a good thing in principle, and I am concerned that muddling up co-living and PBSA is a dangerous erring from that policy. So that's a general point. However, we do need to take into account the issues raised by Mr. Tipping in relation to H5 and the need to create balanced communities, because this development, taken in the context of the development, the neighbouring development of the ambulance station, which is a material consideration, will tip the balance too much towards a high density of purpose-built student accommodation and accommodation for very transient tenants, because co-living is designed for short-term living. However, government guidance does suggest that tenancy should be offered for up to 3 years. So if we look at what that might mean, I'm concerned that national space standards have been disregarded, so that rooms minimum size is 18 metres squared, which I don't think is adequate for reasons that we've already heard. But I'm also interested in the amenity space. Much has been made of the outside amenity space, both on-site and off-site. In the report it says that there is 2.2 metres squared allocated per room. The council's own policy in DG 413.4 talks about a minimum of 10 metres squared of communal space per dwelling being applied as a rule of thumb. So maybe that only applies to flats, but actually why would it not apply here, especially when people are having room sizes which are well below the acceptable with the standard room sizes. So I actually feel that the scheme would not provide acceptable living standards, which is one of the criteria set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, Clause 125. I feel that the management plan for this site is really very weak, and I am quite disturbed that people living in the co-living or even the student accommodation could be required to pay for the hire of a dining room or such like, and that is happens elsewhere with co-living. So that because there's a lack of information about this, it's really not good. I note the comments made by the design panel. I am concerned about the, I do actually welcome the efforts made to manage the massing on the site. Okay, so the setting back and the moving. But I actually think that the density and scale of this is inappropriate for the site, especially in the context of, we've talked about urban design. Well, actually, I do think we can incorporate, and we must incorporate, green spaces in our urban design, and the City Council's own local planning policy does look at the protection of existing and mature trees. So this is obviously not being done, and I would suggest that those trees are in fact helping to create a landmark along Heavy Tree Road, which shows that Exeter is different and not a unikit example in urban design as you can find anywhere else. So for those reasons, I won't be supporting it. Oh, sorry, I just got one more point actually. I am very concerned about this notion around co-living not contributing to the housing and land supply issue in the way that we might imagine, because it could, if it's better designed, have a possibility to do so. But actually, if this ratio means that it doesn't contribute 100%, then it's not an efficient use of land, which was something that was pointed out in the report as justifying greater density. So we need to have alternative types of accommodation to make best use of this land, because it's not going to be good quality accommodation.
Thank you, Chair. Could I also thank all the speakers who have been extremely eloquent. I'll try to be short and brief and raise issues that have not been raised 8 times already. One of the concerns of me is the interuse of words within the documentation. We sometimes talk of accommodation, we sometimes talk of housing, we sometimes talk of homes. I've got a concept of what housing and a home is. Accommodation is something different, and I think what we're looking on this development is accommodation we're providing. We're not providing housing in any sense because of the short-term nature of it and the design and the facilities assorted with it. And I think it's nice to think of cosy homes. These are not cosy homes. This is accommodation that we're providing. I think one of the major issues we had with the first incarnation of this development was the visual impact on Heavy Road, particularly in relation to St Luke's College. I don't think that is improved at all. I think its closeness to the pavement is altering the street scene there entirely and destroying what we've tried to build up with Waitrose, which should have been a continuation of what Waitrose had done by setting their car park and their building back from the road. The density and massing is still as great. 8-story buildings. I know they're there for market reasons and for profit reasons, but they're going to be there for 50 or 100 years, and that's the decision we're making this evening. I do get concerned, no disrespect to my colleagues here, about car-free developments. It does seem to me often it's virtue signaling by developers, because if you haven't got to provide the car parking spaces, you can increase the density of the buildings on the site. And what I'd like to know is, of the 1,000 students who are going to come to the site, how many will have cars and where they're going to go? Because I know in my own ward we have issues with that in the local community of students and student parking, because there is no way we or the university can stop people bringing vehicles to the city, as much as we might like. We cannot stop that, and that is an issue. And this is 1,000. This is about 10 to 15% of the total electorate in this ward increasing on one site. This is going to have a tremendous impact upon the community, and particularly when we think of Newtown, which was in itself a revolutionary style of inner city development in the 70s, when the government put money in to pedestrianise it and improve the facilities in the area. I am also concerned, as I say in the report, that we were told about co-living sites. I'm concerned about the existing number of empty PBSA sites that are not being developed in the city. Where is the demand for all of this? I know that's not a planning consideration, economic plan, but the situation we're then left with empty sites, be it the Harlequin Centre, the King Billy pub site, the Johnson site out in Cowley Bridge Road. All our issues are in limbo for potential PBSAs, either agreed or potentially to come before us at some future date. Here we have a site for another 1,000. This is a market-led decision, what's happening in this site. And unfortunately, the police authority have to raise the maximum they can for the site, but I'm very disappointed they could provide no evidence that there was any prior consultation with anybody before going to this scale of development and asking the community and us as local representatives what we thought was best for this site, and then proceeding on that basis. If we look at student numbers, this is from the university website today. In 2017, in Exeter, on the 2 campuses, there were 20,075 students, that's postgraduates and undergraduates. 21-22, that takes us up to the end of last term, there were 27,276. That is a dramatic increase in the number of students over the years. We know that. But in a sense, it is an issue caused by the university. I think in some ways we ought to look to them and say, you have some responsibility within this matter, instead of seeing us as a local authority resolving your problems for them. We want them to build on their own campuses. They've got the St Luke's site, etc. there, rather than taking away what sites we have got available in the town. Mentions already made about design, living standards, etc. for the people there. There's also reference to the idea that somehow all these PBSAs are solving our HMO crisis, as already mentioned by a fellow councillor earlier. If you had a choice of living in these or being with a friend in an HMO with your own front garden somewhere you can park the car, what would you go for? There has been no evidence of any massive decrease in the number of HMOs. Hence, we've undertaking our own Article 4 review in the city and waiting to see the impact that will have on future planning. And the whole point of community infrastructure, this will be a burden upon the community, not necessarily an asset to that immediate community. And I see very few alleviating points in the design or the features to give this application my support.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. First point I'd like to make is cars and students still exist whether we give them housing or not. So it's a bit of a red herring, that one. They're still going to exist, they're still going to come to the city, they will find somewhere to live. So that's a little of, it's not relevant to this application. I would also say that there is evidence to show that the principle of PBSAs is working, because we have 7,000 more students and the number of HMOs has stayed consistent, and in your ward they've gone down. So I'd like just you know, that again, not strictly true. And scaling and massing doesn't always have to be an issue if you've got good design, and this is where my objection to the application comes in. I actually don't mind co-living, I've said that before, and had an interesting holiday recently where I looked at tiny homes principles while I was in the Netherlands, and actually there are some really good things about environmental impacts, that the bigger our houses are, the more we consume, the more we fill things, there's an issue. So I think there is actually a conversation to be had with co-living and that kind of tiny homes principle that we need to debate. And you know, we're looking at that through the local plans co-living stuff, but we're ahead of that with this at the moment. But what I would say is I don't think this is good design, and I'm not happy with it on that site. And mainly for those reasons, along with a lot of others that have been raised by other people, and I don't want to say new things, I do think there are arguments that are red herrings in this, but I do believe that this is the wrong application on this site. That's not to say that co-living is wrong there, or that students are wrong there, or that a large-scale application is wrong there. In my opinion, the design is poor and it's not taken into account its surroundings, so I will also be voting against this application. Does anyone else have some? Oh, go on, Councillor Byack, you know you want to go. You done?
Okay, thanks. One thing in politics, you've got to understand which way the wind's going and what's happening. And it's clear what is going to happen. And I'm going to be very interested to hear the reasons for refusal when they come for, if any, if Councillor Jobson's can be enhanced or made clear. I think it is a shame that there is quite high density here, to be quite honest, because the principle, if you look at the principle of where I believe the council is coming from, and many of us would agree, is that we need alternative accommodation for younger people, and now this so-called transient people we have coming into Exeter, these single transient people wandering in everywhere, and I don't know whether or not we've got to watch them, but they will require a facility. Not everybody wants to live in 3-bedroom houses with a garden and a garage and wash the car on a Sunday morning. They don't need a car if they're going to live up there necessarily. That's the thing. It's a shame that the police authority are in a position to actually try to get as much out of this as they possibly can, and that's what's obviously driving them. I understand that. It's a shame that we can't have a far better discussion on what would be a realistic, sustainable approach for some sort of residential use, somewhere where co-workers can come and live. It's ideal, as it's been mentioned, to the hospital and everything, and it's a shame that really we don't like the total numbers. I'm not necessarily comfortable with it. There's a lot of preconceptions here which I don't share in relation to it. Actually, if you look at some of the history of Exeter in some of our main corridors, we have built up to the street, and actually there was a picture up there which showed it, and on this side the wall of St Luke's College is right up to the street. It's right up to the street. It was. The housing going down the hill is right up to the street, and I feel sure it was. And if you look at the bottom from the swimming baths up on the other side, is up to the street. So I can understand people to wanting to make their point, to prove their case that they will bring everything in. So co-living is, I mean, I think the concept of it, of giving opportunities to other people other than just students, because you can't get into one of them if you're not a student, to giving those opportunities for other people other than students to acquire or to live in some of those accommodations, I think is a good principle. But I don't know, there seems to be a fear of it, and I just don't know. I'm hoping that the local plan will bring out some stuff. 18 metres, I think it's interesting what you said about Amsterdam. The biodiversity and the biodiversity gain, which is what we want to do, I think we've got to be careful whereby we are, I suppose I'm going to be quoted just a little bit in the thing, of whether or not we're putting, well I will be, I know I will, but you've got to think about The tree situation is very important.
Yeah.
Very, very important. Is how you measure that against the housing situation. Because if you have a development that many of you were saying that, you know, in a nice utopian world we would have, some of those trees are going to go. Will that be okay? Is what I'm saying. So, but I get what this debate's about. People are against it. They need to fire as much against it as they can, and I know it's going to go down. Now, what I'm really wanting to know is how we're going to put it forward, whether or not we can still engage, because you've had a lot of work. They've done a lot of work. Let's be brutally honest, because they will pull their hair out to say, I don't know what more we can now do. That's what they may well say. Whether or not we can engage, these developers or whoever their chosen developers are, to try to bring something more forward which is more acceptable to the community. So just to say, because I think it's important, the two key people who had the most influence on the way I'm going to go is Councillor Jemima Moore and Councillor Matt Vizard. That's who I was listening to. A lot of other stuff I've heard before, and it don't really rest with me. So those were the people. I listened intently to what they say, and of course to Councillor Branston's submission in relation to what was going on for the people in that ward. And so therefore I can see how it's going. So we need the recommendation, Chair, I hope, that we make it perfectly clear on how we're going to get round this, because doing nothing is not a sensible option in my view. Something needs to happen. We need the housing. You've mentioned Spruce Close. You know, we're going to be under pressure as a city. However, being under pressure doesn't mean to say we've got to do something wrong. All right, and if this is viewed as doing something wrong, I agree we shouldn't be doing that just for the sake of it. So there's a lot of work to do. Now, whether or not they want to engage us or whether or not they want to go somewhere else, I don't know. And I'm not using that as a threat, because I don't respond to that. We will make our decision. We need to make our decision. I just hope that there's some latitude, but I just feel the financial pressures that they'll be on won't allow that to happen.
I'm on it, Councillor Bialik and Councillor Owens.
I don't know if there's any point speaking now. I'm going against the flow here, I'm afraid, and there are many things that I agree with and many points that have been raised that I agree with, but I think there are a couple of groups' voices that haven't been here. They're not here at this table, so I want to represent those views. So the first thing is I'm a councillor in the Pennsylvania ward. One of my biggest complaints is about students. Why are the students living here? So many ongoing issues between residents and students. They have to go somewhere. We all know they have to go somewhere. And there's an HMOs problem with HMOs, and there's now a review ongoing with that, because so many residents, I get emails almost every day from residents who do not want to live near students. They do not want to live with students. Where are they going to go? Okay, so please don't whisper, because that's really distracting. Okay, it's a brownfield site. First of all, brownfield site, I think that's a good thing. No, it's not a perfect application. I don't think I've ever seen a perfect application, actually, by the way. But this is about balance, right? This is about balancing priorities. And there are many different priorities. I know that this is very upsetting for many of you to hear, but there are many different balancing priorities here. And one of them is there is a housing shortage. Right, and it is great if you live in a house with a sunny garden. Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. Well done, congratulations. It is great if you have lots of space to live in and you have trees and all of those things. That's great. But I know key workers. I am friends with people who are in the most dire circumstances. Please understand that that's what the housing shortage means. They are really not living in good spaces. I have a friend who's a key worker who commutes in from Crediton every day. With all respect, Councillor Branson, yes, I would love to see those trees saved. I've done my fair amount of chaining myself to trees back in the day. I've put that on record now, this picture somewhere. I would love to see them saved, but the fact is that you're talking about how much carbon each tree saves. How much carbon is saved by my friend who is commuting from Crediton into Exeter every day as a key worker? How much carbon will be saved if she doesn't have to make that journey? She cannot find decent accommodation. Please don't make assumptions that she doesn't want to live with students, or she doesn't want to live with there's a garden and it doesn't have sun. She wants to live in Exeter in a central location and again, making assumptions. Is it affordable? Is it not? Is it affordable for her to pay petrol into Exeter every day? I'm sorry, but I don't hear her view represented here at all, and this is the situation that a lot of our care workers are in. I know it's upsetting to hear. I understand about the aesthetics. I moved to Exeter for the aesthetics. That's why I don't want us to build on green sites. I don't want us to build on the fields. Where are we going to build them? Where are these houses going to go? Because there are a lot of people living in dire circumstances. I would love for those aesthetics to match the 1800s, right? The campus building that was built in the 1800s. But let's be honest, it's not going to happen. Who is going to build it? It is not a perfect application, but we need to balance priorities. As the member champion for net zero, I am thinking about the commuting and the cars, and we do need to support developments that are not so completely car-led. We know how many developments we've had through that are so car-led, 2-3 parking spaces, that is what we're dealing with. It's either that or it's this. This is central enough that you don't have to have a car. Yeah, maybe some people will, but it will help to discourage, and that's all we can do. We cannot tell people you can't have a car, leave your car at home. We can only discourage. I see a development that has the potential for doing that. Yes, there are lots of problems with it, but I keep hearing, I've heard a lot about, we feel sorry for people who live there. Maybe you should go see where they're living right now. And you won't feel sorry for them living somewhere more central. Maybe it's a burden on the community. Maybe they need that community. Maybe being in that area gives them a community that they don't have when they're commuting in from outside of Exeter. And by the way, key workers who are having to do that, who are paying these now high petrol prices, feel bad about the environment as well. They really don't have any other choice. I don't see how we can, in good faith, say no. I just think morally you can't say no to these kinds of developments. I know it's not perfect. If you show me a perfect application, I will keel over probably, because quite a lot of the time I have huge objections, especially from a climate change perspective, but we have to put that front and centre. That matters for all of us. That matters long term for all of us. And in that respect, I think the location is good. The fact it's a brownfield site is good. It's not on our greenfields. That's good. We know how difficult it is to oppose these sites when they are on greenfields because of the housing shortage. So yeah, just to sum up, I'm going to be controversial, very unlike me, and say that I support this application. Please consider that there are voices not at this table who also should have an equal priority alongside with local residents who care about aesthetics and concerns about space. Some of them are living in much smaller spaces, in temporary accommodation, struggling to get to work every day, and we need to have more spaces for them to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Light. Right, seeing as I don't see any more hands, I'm going to put this to a vote, but I think taking into account what Councillor Bialik said earlier, we could look at deferral to consider continue having this conversation. I think there is a risk with that the application will then go for non-determination and therefore we lose our involvement in the application.
Sorry, through you, Chair, there's been an extension of time agreed till October, so they can't go for non-determination.
Not until October, so we could... I think the thing we have to ask is the application going to come back that much better if we defer it, or should we refuse it and find the grounds on which to refuse it? So that's what I'm putting to you as a planning committee. I would favour, I think, refusing the application and just having that clean break, because as has been mentioned, we have been discussing this application and the staff have worked incredibly hard, and all credit to the police force. They have been part of that conversation, the developers as well. It hasn't, and as Councillor Branston said, it is an improvement on the original application. We all saw a planning member working group, so there have been improvements. I just don't think it's improved enough. So would anybody like to... Yeah, I'm getting there, don't worry, Ian, you'll get your moment. Would anybody like to make a recommendation that we refuse the application?
I'll support your proposal.
Yeah, and someone would like to second it. In which case, I'm going to suggest that we adjourn the meeting, because we've had quite a lengthy debate and I think you know the views that we're working with for refusal. And those are including the design and massing, the policies that were mentioned by Councillor Jobson, the scale, and some of the other concerns, that we take those away and that we return to the next planning committee with a well-written and thought-out reason for refusal. Yeah, I'm just letting everybody know what we're going to do, so everyone is clear with what they're voting for, okay? All right then.
So, Chair, can I just, through you, make a slightly alternative suggestion?
Go for it.
I think if the feeling of the committee is to refuse, we get that. I think that tonight we're not going to be able to craft those technical reasons for refusal. Yeah. But what we would need from you is a really clear understanding of what you're voting for in terms of reasons. So I would propose that we set out in broad terms. There's in my reading or hearing there are 3 key areas, and to vote individually to make sure that the majority are clear that that's what you want to refuse on, and we can go away and craft those decisions. I think that I would prefer that, because that gives the clarity and we avoid any miscommunication. So what I'm saying is we take each reason, and I can summarise, if you like, what I think those reasons are, and you can vote on those reasons in turn.
Come back to the next meeting, Chair.
Yeah.
We'd come back with detailed, with the detailed technical reasons. So, because I think there's a really clear view on design.
Yeah.
I'm less clear on the view of the committee about residential amenity, particularly in terms of co-living. I'm not sure there's a majority on that, and the loss of trees and the biodiversity. I think it would help us as officers to know which 3, if those are the 3 issues, which 3 you want us to go away and craft reasons for refusal. I think that would be what
I'd agree. Design and street scene are really important. There is the issue with the internal, I think, outdoor amenity more than internal amenity. So it's.
I object to that. I object to the internal amenity, which I don't think complies with CDG 4 and MPPF 125C in terms of the proposal for 2.25 metres squared, and the fact that it can't guarantee it'll be free in perpetuity.
Do you want to? Right, that's.
I'm happy to vote on it.
Oh no, that's what I was going to say. So we.
What Diana says, and I can get that.
Yeah. Okay, so do you want to vote on the first thing, which is the street scene? We'll do it fairly and in order, rather than me making decisions unilaterally for us.
What I suggest though is that on design, so you've expressed concerns about the siting because of the building coming forward and not allowing landscaping, the height of the massing, and the impact on the appearance of Heavy Tree Road and St Luke's campus. And those, what I picked up as the key design issues.
Yeah. So is everybody happy that that's a reason for objection?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, everyone's happy with that. Because in a minute you're going to vote that you object, and these will be given as the reasons, so you better be sure.
Residential amenity. So let's take there's 2 types of accommodation. First of all, co-living and student accommodation. Are you saying you want to object to both in terms of amenity, residential amenity, or is it just the co-living? And if it's the co-living, what are the issues that you want to refuse on?
As far as PBSA is concerned, it's the external amenity. But the co-living is both internal and external, so there is a difference between the 2.
I agree with that.
But that's my view.
And is everybody happy that that would be a reason for their
My only
objection?
concern with that would it be easier then to say, okay, I'm the developer, I'll have an all student accommodation then.
It's a risk.
That will sort
I
that
would,
one
yeah,
out,
it's a genuine risk. Yeah.
That will sort that problem out then.
So you all have to consider that. It would
Do
be.
you see
Yeah.
the point I'm making? that could be a consequence because we can't, you know, they've worked hard to get them to that.
Okay, but
they may say, well, if it's easier, it can always do accommodation.
What we're going to need from you is, okay, what is the, if it's just, let's take the student accommodation, if it's the external environment, what is it that you're objecting to? What is it? What is the harm that you're seeking a reason for refusal against?
It's the amenity space of the Newtown community, isn't it? Because what we're saying is, like we do for everything that happens in Newtown and St Leonard's, Belmont Park will suck it up, and it can't do that forever. So what we're saying is there is not enough amenity on site, essentially.
So it's the wider impact then, it's not, it's the wider impact.
It's the local impact on the site as well as the wider impact, because there isn't sufficient amenity space on the site to accommodate.
So lack of provision in the surrounding area is what you're saying. But in terms of that external amenity within the development, what is it you're objecting to?
There's a deficient level of amenity because it's I have no problem with higher density, so there's no point laughing. This is a really serious issue. This is a really dense development, and with the courtyards in the middle and the lack of light, the outside amenity isn't going to be able to function properly to perform the job that it's meant to do.
So lack of daylight and the sort of enclosure, the sort of sense of...
It's the lack of real usable amenity.
Courtyards are nice. Courtyards can be really lovely. I haven't got a problem with being a courtyard. It's the...
It's your scale and massing of the build is going to stop the courtyard doing what it's put in there to do.
Yeah. So it's actually realistically usable amenity space.
Alright. And then are you applying that to the co-living and in addition the internal?
Co-living courtyard is smaller, it's narrower than the
Yeah, no, I mean, you mentioned in both external internal meaning the space standards within the co-living.
The internal amenity related to the fact that the smallest room is 18 metres squared, and in the report it said that the dwelling management report says it's 2.2 metres squared per room.
Yeah.
So there isn't, because we don't have any planning policy locally, we haven't had those discussions that Councillor Moore suggests would be really helpful about what is useful types of amenity, what is useful, and in the council's own planning policy, it says that the minimum of 10 square metres of communal space per dwelling is expected. This is policy GG4 13.4. And so, like, how can we equate that this is okay when our own policy says it should be 10 metres square?
To paraphrase that, so it's the substandard quality of the living accommodation within the co-living element, is what you're saying. Yeah. As well as the external amenity space. Okay. That's clear. So all I'm doing at the moment is because we're the ones going to have to craft these reasons and come back. I just want to make sure we're absolutely clear on what the reasons are. So the third area, I think, was the loss of trees and biodiversity. Is that something that you want as a committee to refuse it on?
Well, the council policy is to try and preserve trees, and there was the tree officer report which said that a certain portion of the trees, there should be consideration of redesigning the building around because they were grade A trees.
How does that fit with biodiversity gain?
Well, I don't know.
Or, I mean, is it...
You don't take trees out and then replace them all to get biodiversity gain. You start from what you have and then add to it.
If you're getting more, you want to take it. I don't know what...
That's what a simple developer would do, plough the field and then say, oh, we're planting some new trees and that's more.
I don't think that is what they're saying. What I would say personally is I don't think it's the strongest argument, and you want the strongest argument. We've had this conversation before. It's not that it's not important, it weakens your argument, and I would say in this case, despite the fact that I'm very fond of those trees, and some of them were actually planted in memoriam to people, I don't think it's a strong argument for this, and I would caution against it being a reason for refusal.
Okay, maybe we could put this to debate. These are very important trees that have been proposed. In the tree report, it states the grading of the trees, and there's a section of the trees from the tree officer which says that, you know, some of the trees, it says, oh, it's, you know, regrettable that they need to be taken down, but in labelled as development, and there's a number of trees which say they shouldn't be removed at all.
Yeah.
So it's quite clear in that tree report.
I'm happy to put it to the vote, please. Those who think the trees and biodiversity as a reason for refusal, sorry.
Thinking of those at the back. All those in favour of trees and biodiversity being a reason for refusal?
I've got 8, Chair.
All those against?
I was going to reason. No, I know the reasons.
Just picking the reasons. There's some damage in this and we need to
I think we've got enough now to write technical reasons for refusal based on that.
So all of those favour of refusal on the grounds that we've just discussed, which is the 3 items, which is scaling and massing, we've got the other one, amenity space, and the biodiversity gain, please raise your hand.
Got 10.
Okay, all those against? And those abstain.
First time in 11 years.
Get off that fence, Councillor Wyatt.
First time in 11 years.
Okay.
Three abstain.
3,
Okay, in which case, I'm going to adjourn this matter to come back to the beginning of the planning committee on the 10th of October, where the officers will have written our grounds for refusal. And as mentioned by Matt, we have until, we've got an extension now until October, so that should cover.
I'll just ask
Yeah.
on process there.
Yeah.
We won't be dealing with the old application from
No.
start at that meeting. We'll just be dealing with
Just
those
agree
issues.
the reasons for refusal. We
Make
have
sure
now
in case
refused
we
the
get
application.
lots of-
Okay. So, item 6 on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, is to consider the report of City Development, the Director of City Development of lists on made and withdrawn application.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Members are just asked to note the items that have been determined.
If you're leaving the room, could you do it quietly, because we've still got a meeting going on, thank you. The appeals report, I assume that's you as well, Matt?
Thank you, Chair. Again, members are just asked to note the appeal decisions that have been made.
And the final thing on the agenda is the site inspection party, which is to be held on Tuesday, 27th of September, and that's Councillors Hannaford, Lights and more. If you are not able to attend, please try and... Sorry, I don't know why I'm looking at you. So you're not, you're not able to attend. If you're not able to attend, just talk to somebody else on the committee and swap it and let Howard know, and that's fine.
When is it, sorry?
27th of September, my husband's birthday. It's not relevant to planning, but I just thought I'd let you all know. Thank you very much, everybody, for the way in which you've conducted yourself during this meeting. I am very proud of you all, like a loving mother, and I didn't have to shout at any of you. See you next time.